came up and she said, just so you know, there's some tussocks going into Iditarod, which, they really undersold.
Welcome to 10 Minute Travels. With me as always is Phil Freeman.
And with me as always is Shane Patrick. And today we're going to be talking to Emily Maxwell, Iditarod Musher.
Let's get right to it, shall we? So, we've talked a bunch about the dog training. What sort of training do you do? Like, are you a runner or just let the dogs do the running?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. And I know some mushers train more and, like lift weights and run and everything. To me, at least in my time mushing, I find the best workout for mushing is to go mushing. And of course, a lot of the chores that we're doing at home and around the yard, et cetera. I mean, you're day in, day out, you're hauling heavy buckets and, and then just to be on the sled really is the best training, because I remember when your first few runs every year on the sled, I'd find myself being a little bit sore, in my hips or in your abs or whatever. So I think, that's kind of what I've always thought is the best training to go out mushing is to go mushing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do a lot of extra work and, that didn't need to be done really. Cause you're so, you're physically so engaged all the time that when you get a chance to rest, I think it's best to just rest. I wasn't like doing push-ups or jumping jacks or anything. It was like, I've got enough physical training.
Right. The team that you ran with this year, mm-hmm. They're from out of town, right?
Right.
How did they find you? You find them? How did that work?
So that's kind of a long story. I had a team that I started working with last fall, up close to Fairbanks, and that the Musher, it was a second team, and about 7 weeks before the race, he told me he wasn't going to let me run those dogs on the race, which of course 7 weeks is, it's like no time at all, and
right.
After having spent that whole season developing that bond with that team, that you're the one feeding them and running them and scooping their poop and taking care of their feet and all that stuff, it's like you build a bond. And so I really, I didn't know what to do. And I drove to Fairbanks and I spent a few days there. And I was like devastated,
Yeah, gutting.
Yeah. And I felt like, if it had just been me the whole time and all my own money and everything that I had spent, it would have been one thing. But, Girdwood has like always been so supportive of me. Even people like before they knew me were helping me with fundraising and donations and things. And, a lot of the businesses in town and sponsorship, the resort sponsored me, et cetera. And, so I felt this pressure that everybody else, when I've said that, they said, oh, you shouldn't have felt that way. It's not like you had to please anybody. But to me, I just couldn't give up that easily because I felt like it wasn't just me and about me. It was about all these people that had backed me and done so much for me and followed my progress and everything through the season. And so I messaged a friend of mine who's in Talkeetna, and she's a dog musher, and we were both rookies the same year, and we'd worked on the race together for the 2 years prior to that. And I messaged her and told her what happened, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, like come down to Talkeetna, and we'll figure something out. We'll find you a team somehow, And so I went down there, and we made phone calls. I called kennels. Sent out messages to people and said, hey, do you have a second team that you want to go? And I ended up getting a message from a guy down in Montana, Brett Brueggemann, who he had been a rookie the same year as me. And we ran, the first half of the race, we ran kind of a similar schedule. So we saw each other a lot at the checkpoints. We chat and, a super nice guy. And he messaged me, in that time this year when I was looking for a team. And he's like, said, hey, I don't know what happened, but I heard you're in the market for a team and I have a second team that has the miles on them and the training to be able to go, give me a call. And so I called him, and, we decided to do that. He had a what we call a puppy team, yearling team, mostly yearling, that they had done a bunch of middle distance races through the season, similar to what my team the year before had done. But the big kind of question mark was that was going to have a very short amount of time to get to know them. Because by the time they actually came up, they had a few more races, at the time he and I are talking, and to do down in Montana. And so by the time they drove up from Montana, that was 2 weeks before the restart of the race.
Whoa.
And I really, thought a lot about whether or not if I should just give up, and I talked to a lot of mushers, including Ramey Reddington. He and Barb Reddington are friends, and Ramey's dad was Joe Reddington Sr., and he started the Iditarod. And, I have a lot of, kind of older mushers in my life that have been mentors to me. And I asked him what he thought, and basically him and everyone said it's been done before. It's not the easiest thing, but you know what you're doing with the dogs, and why not try it? And so I did, and they got there 2 weeks before the race, and I just spent like every moment that I could with them, and not to like unnaturally force a bond at all, but just I thought if I feed them every meal that they have, if I harness them every time they're harnessed and booty them every time they're booted, and do everything I can for them to get them to trust me, that there's a good chance. And, of course, with the way the race went, it was kind of like, it was just the perfect storm. I think if we'd had a great trail, we would have been all right. But, it was so hot. And, the trail was just notoriously bad this year. Even people that had a good race.
Balls.
Oh man. Yeah. And that was where, that's shortly before the halfway mark of Iditarod, which was, the year before, where I was like so gleeful to pull into after that big storm we'd been through. But yeah, the tussocks, the checkpoint before Iditarod is called Ophir. And it's about 85 miles between Ophir and Iditarod. And as I was leaving Ophir, one of the comms ladies, the communications for the race, she came up and she said, just so you know, there's some tussocks going into Iditarod, which, they really undersold just how much before Iditarod it was going to start. Because the way she said it, I thought, it's a couple miles before the next checkpoint are going to be a little hairy. And it started, I ran to Don's cabin just as I did the year before, although I didn't have to stay 14 hours this year. I stayed about 4 hours, and then it was getting to be about a little bit before dusk, and we took off. And those tussocks started probably like 35 miles before the checkpoint, and they did not stop until the checkpoint. And it was rough, like little patches of ice or snow every now and again on the trail, and you're thinking, please let it just stay this way so we've got a trail, and then it would be back to tussocks. And it's the sled really isn't designed to go smoothly through them, and the dogs of course are having to kind of like high step and weave through them, and it was hard on them. And I'm like off the sled, and I was pushing as much as I could just to make it easier for them. And of course I'm wearing bunny boots and everything and high stepping through these tussocks, and the sled's getting stuck. And, we went on like that. I remember seeing there was a sign that said 14 miles to Iditarod. I'm like, oh my God, and which if you had a good trail, you're like, 14 miles, but what we were going through, it was like, Jesus, are we ever going to make it? And, we were, what I thought was about 7 miles from the checkpoint when I got over the crest of a hill, and they were stopping. Like going uphill. And I went up, and I was like, we got to keep the momentum going. We just got to get there. Because at that point, I think I already knew. I was like, I think we're going to be done at this next checkpoint. Just because I could just feel it in them that they weren't into it anymore, and I totally did not blame them, one little bit. But so we get up over this hill, and so I went up and I grabbed the gang line, and I pulled the gang line like with them and walked forward, and they would go with me as I walked. And so we get to the top of the hill, and then I get on the sled, and I'm like, all right, guys, let's go. And they take off down the hill. Well, partway down this hill, and right around now it's getting to be dusk, and there's a team just stopped, and I would say off the side of the trail, but there really wasn't a trail anywhere because there's no snow. I mean, every now and again you'd see a marker, but you're just in kind of like open land and grass. And so we come across this team, and they pull up right next to this other team, and they stop. And, this is kind of like your nightmare scenario because it can be kind of contagious, that quitting.
Yeah, they stop. We should stop.
Right. Yeah. Like, why are we going to keep going? And it was this another musher, a French woman, and she's done the race a number of times too. And I remember, she didn't seem at all concerned about the dogs just like sitting there. And I said, how long have you been here? And she's like, oh, probably a couple hours. I'm like, okay. And I could tell she had kind of was like resigned. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to get mine to go and see if yours will follow me, and trying to get all the dogs wound up and like, let's go. We're close, we're not that far away.
That was Emily Maxwell. If you want to learn more about Emily or any of the other things we do at 10 Minute Travels, please check out 10minutetravels.com.
And we want to remind you to make sure that your sense of humor matches your sense of adventure.
And please like, subscribe, and share this podcast on all the platforms.